Okay, so today we're going over some word problems, and some of these problems are consecutive problems or number problems, and then a rectangle problem. So some of the words that you need to know are just some basic words that the word more than and the word some means you're adding. The word fewer and less than means subtract, and the word twice means to multiply by 2. And then we have consecutive numbers are one number right after the other. Odd numbers are numbers like 7, 9, 11, and then they're consecutive means they're one right after the other. And then consecutive even numbers are even numbers one after another. So let's look at problem number 1. In problem number 1, it says one number is 9 more than the second number. The sum of the two numbers is 29. What are the two numbers? So basically, we're just adding up two numbers. So if you take a number and you add another number, we're supposed to get 29. That's what the sum means. It means we're adding up two numbers. So that's what the sum is. And one of the numbers is going to be bigger than the other. Matter of fact, it's not only just going to be bigger, but it's going to be 9 more bigger. So basically, we have to create an equation that gives that idea to it. So we're going to create what's called, we're going to define our variables. So here we go. So we're going to say, let's let x represent the second number. So let's let x represent the second number. And then we've got one other number. So we can say one number or the other number, right? Basically, we just have two numbers. And so we're going to let x represent the second number, and the other number is going to be 9 more than. So that means the second number has to be 9 more than this guy. So 9 more than x. So we're going to say 9 more than the second number, because remember, x represents the second number. So notice how you can read this. You can read, so look at the sentence, and notice it says one number is 9 more than the second number, right? One number is 9 more than the second number, right? Let's fix that. Okay, so now we have our defining our variables. So now we're just going to add those two numbers together, because remember it says the sum. So the sum means you're going to add numbers together, and we want the sum of those numbers to equal 29. And so the first number is, right, maybe put that in yellow. That's the second number. And then x plus 9 represents the other number, right? So we just basically have to show adding those two together. So we're going to say x and then x plus 9. So that's showing that we're adding these two numbers together. And then that's the equation. And then once we have the equation, we want you to solve it. So isn't that 1x plus 1x? So wouldn't we combine like terms and say 2x plus 9 equals 29? And then wouldn't we undo adding 9 by subtracting 9? And then wouldn't we undo multiplying by 2 by dividing by 2? So those wonderful algebra skills that you guys are doing a great job learning. So that means x equals 10. So wherever we see an x, we can go back and replace it with 10. So I can take out the x and I can replace it with 10. So if I go all the way back up to this, the definition of the variables, I just put a 10 where the x is. And so what does that tell me? So that tells me the two numbers are, so isn't the second number 10? And isn't the first one 10 plus 9, which is 19. So the two numbers are 10 and 19. Okay, let's look at number 2. So this says the sum of two consecutive numbers is 49. What are the two numbers? So once again, we are adding two numbers together, right? That's what the word sum means we're going to add. And we want those two numbers to equal 49. So again, we are just basically adding two different numbers, and we want that total to be 49. Except for these two numbers are going to be consecutive numbers. So what do we mean by consecutive? Consecutive means one right after the other. So 4, 5, and 6 are considered consecutive. 21, 22, 23 are called consecutive. 2 and 6 and 9 are not consecutive. They're not one right after the other. So that's what consecutive means. So let's just look at consecutive for a second. What would I have to do to get to each number? So if you notice, if I add 1, doesn't that give me 5? And if I add 5 plus 1, don't I get 6? So if I add 6 plus 1, doesn't that give me the next consecutive number? So every time I add 1, doesn't that give me the next consecutive number? So the pattern is, if n is the first number, right? So if n is the first number, what would I do to n to get the next consecutive number? Wouldn't I add 1 to it? So wouldn't that give me n plus 1 for the next one? So n plus 1 is the second consecutive number. And that's our definition. So we say let's let n be the first consecutive number, and let's let n plus 1 be the second consecutive number. And then we can write our equation. So defining your variables is what that was called, and that's super important. And now we just need to add those two numbers together, and we want that total, right, to be 49. So the first one was just n, and the second number was n plus 1. So we add those two numbers together. That first number is n, and then n plus 1 is the next one. So there's our equation. And then once you have the equation, we want you to solve it using your wonderful algebra skills. So isn't 1n plus 1n, when you combine like terms, doesn't that give you 2n plus 1 equals 49? Subtract 1 from both sides. Undo multiplication by dividing, and n equals 24. So now we can go back up and replace wherever we see an n, we can replace that n with 24. So if we put a 24 there and a 24 there, what does that tell us? So what is the first number and what is the second number? So the two consecutive numbers are 24 and 24 plus 1, 25. In number 3, again, it's the sum of two consecutive even numbers is 62. What are the two numbers? So once again, we are finding the sum, which means we have to add two numbers together, and we want the total to be 62. But this time, they're consecutive even. So what does it mean to be even numbers and consecutive? So 4 and 12 and 20 are even numbers, but they are not consecutive. Consecutive means one even number after the other. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. 2 is even, and 4 is even, and 6 is even, and 8 is even, and 10 is even. So those are your consecutive even numbers. So we have to skip the odd ones, right? So we're only talking about the even ones. So notice what the pattern is. So what do we do to 2 to get 4? Don't we just add 2? And if we add 4 plus 2, don't we get 6? And if we add 6 plus 2, don't we get 8? And if we add 8 plus 2, don't we get 10? So aren't we adding 2 to get to the next one? Right? So that means if we have a number to get to the next one, don't we just need to add 2 to that number to get to the next one? So here's one of the numbers, and here's the second even number, right? So we're going to use those as our definitions or our variable expressions. So let's erase, 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 erase. I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background. Poor thing's been doing that all day. Okay, so we're going to say, let's let n represent the first consecutive even number, and then we have to add 2 to get to the next one. So that's going to be the second consecutive even number. And that is called defining your variable. So now we can write the equation, because the equation says we want the sum, so we need to add, and we want the sum to have a total of 62, and then we need to add those two numbers together. So one of the numbers is just n, and the other number is n plus 2. So one of the numbers is n, and the other number is n plus 2. So there's our equation. Once we have the equation, we can use our wonderful algebra skills to solve. Combine like terms, 1n plus 1n is 2n plus 2. Right? Undo adding first by subtracting. Undo multiplication by division. And we get n equals 30. So wherever we see an n, we can replace it with 30. So we go up here and replace this with 30. Replace this with 30. So what's our final answer? So the two consecutive numbers are 30 is the first one, right? 30 is the first one, and then 30 plus 2 would be 32, right? Are those consecutive even? Yes. If you add them up, do we get 62? Yes. So see, we really do have the right answer. You probably could even figure out the answer by guessing and checking, but this assignment is not about guessing and checking. It's really good. And if you want to practice guessing and checking, that's perfectly fine, and that's very good to do that. But then we want you to write your variable expressions, right? We want you to define your variables. Then we want you to write an equation. Then we want you to solve the equation. Then we want you to write your answer in a complete sentence. So here is another problem. Now, the sum of two consecutive odd numbers is 48. What are the two numbers? So once again, aren't we adding up two numbers? And don't we want the total to be 48, right? We're adding up two numbers, but this time they're consecutive odd. So they're odd. So what are odd numbers? So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, right? Those are odd numbers. And one right after the other is consecutive. So 5, 21, and 23 are odd, but they're not consecutive. So we want it to be one number after the other. So what do you notice is the pattern? Do you see it? Do you see that we're just adding 2 each time again? So if you add 7 plus 2, you get 9. And if you add 9 plus 2, you get 11. So if you add 11 plus 2, doesn't that give you 13? And isn't that the next odd number? If you add 2 to 13, 13 plus 2 is 15. Isn't that the next odd number? So by adding 2, you will get the next odd number. So now that we understand the pattern, let's build the two numbers and write our variable expressions. So we're going to say let n represent the first consecutive odd number. And then if you add 2 to that, you will get the second consecutive odd number. So there is our definition of variables, defining our variables. Now we can find the sum. The sum, remember, means to add numbers. It's the answer you get when you add numbers together. And we want the answer to be 48. And then we have one of the numbers is just n. And the other numbers, the expression for the second number is n plus 2. So we have n, we have n, and then we have n plus 2, right? Because we're adding these two together. And then solve the equation. So this is the equation. And then we're going to solve that equation. So 1n plus 1n is 2n's. We're going to undo addition first by subtracting. We're going to undo multiplication by division. And you get n equals 23. Notice that's an odd number. And then we're going to replace, wherever we see an n, we're going to replace 23. So we're going to go up here, and we're going to put a 23 there, and we're going to put a 23 there. So what does that tell us about the answer? The two consecutive odd numbers are 23 and 23 plus 2, 25. So aren't those odd numbers? Aren't they one consecutive? And if you add those two together, do you get 48? Yep, we get 48. So we know we did it right. Very good. Okay, the last problem is a rectangle problem. It says the width of a rectangle is 5 less than twice the length. The perimeter is 38 feet. Find the dimensions of a rectangle. So remember, dimensions is just a fancy word for finding the length and the width. So we basically just want to find the length, and we want to know and the width. And we're talking about a rectangle, and it's a perimeter problem. So the first thing we want to do is write our variable expressions. So we're going to have the width, and we're going to have the length. We're going to say let, and then let's read that first sentence. So we have the width is, right? So the width of a rectangle is, so there's the word width is, and then it says it's 5 less than. So 5 less than means we have to do 5 subtract. And then it says twice the length. So twice means to multiply by 2. So twice means you're going to multiply by 2. And 5 less than means you're going to subtract 5, right? So we got to do 5 subtract. So the width of a rectangle is 5 less than twice. So we got to multiply 2. And what are we going to multiply 2? We're going to multiply 2 to the length. And we don't know what the length is. So how about we call the length capital L? Or we could call it X or little l, right? So let's read this expression. So I'm going to read this expression to you. And I can write it this way too. So the width is, equal sign is 5 less than twice the length. So you know how to, so again, the width is 5 less than twice the length, right? Okay. So now let's draw a picture, a diagram, and add that into our diagram. So this is about a rectangle. So we have a rectangle, and it says the width. So remember, this is going to be the width. So it's 2L minus 5 because it's 5 less than twice the length, and we're going to use L for the length. And then if we do the perimeter formula, right? Perimeter, don't we have 2 lengths, and don't we have 2 widths? There's a lot of different ways you can do it, right? You can write them, if this is L, then isn't this L? And if this is 2L minus 5, isn't this 2L minus 5? So you can just add up all the sides, or you can use this, which is faster. So the perimeter is 38, right? So the perimeter is 38. So probably a good idea to add that into your diagram. So 38 is the perimeter. So 38 equals 2 lengths. And notice we use capital L for length. So 2 lengths plus 2. And then for the width, right, we have to put 2 times, because remember this means times. And notice the width is 2L minus 5. Right? And then that's our equation. And so maybe we go back and just put it in black so it doesn't look, sometimes all of the color makes it difficult. So that's going to be our equation. And then we just have to solve the equation. So remember, to solve the equation, we want to multiply. Remember, this means 2 is being multiplied to both of these numbers. So we got to use a distributive property. 2 times 2L is 4L. And 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Then can't we combine like terms? When you combine like terms, you just do it. Don't we have 2L and 4L are like terms and they're on the same side? So can't we just say we have 6 L's and then minus a 10? And then can't we undo subtracting 10 by adding 10? So this is where having good algebra skills now that we've been working on really helps out. If you've got your basic algebra skills down pat, then it's like makes everything else easier to learn. Undo multiplication by dividing, and then that gives us L equals 48 divided by 6 is 8, because 6 times 8 is 48. So wherever we see an L, we can replace it with 8. So if we go up and we replace an L with 8, don't forget that means multiply, so we have to put a parentheses there. And so what does that make the length and the width? Because we have to answer the question. So the length is, doesn't it say the length is 8? And I believe that's feet. So 8 feet. You should always put units if they have units, feet or inches or yards. And the width is, and the width is whatever 2, 8 minus 5 is. So I'm going to write 2 times 8 minus 5, right? That's what the width is. So 2 times 8 is 16, minus 5 is 11. 11 feet. So please make sure you're writing your answer in a complete sentence. So again, we want to define our variables. We want to write an equation. We want to solve that equation. And then we want to write our answer in a complete sentence. Okay, do your best.